USAA knows dynamic duos can save the day, like superheroes and sidekicks or auto and home insurance. With USAA, you can bundle your auto and home and save up to 10%. Learn more and get a quote at usaa.com/bundle. Restrictions apply.
Here at the Almond Joy Factory, where tropical vibes abound, we use soft, fresh-tasting coconut.
The crunchiest almonds and delicious chocolate candy.
Ah, but do you know what our most important ingredient is? Sometimes you feel like a nut.
Sometimes you don't.
Almond Joy's got nuts and something even way better than that. Yes, Almond Joy is made with almonds and joy.
Hey all you heroes, hawks, heralds, crows, pirates, and wardens. Welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we unpack, discuss, and galaxy brain about all the lore behind the Dragon Age series.
We are so excited to bring you this podcast. Every episode, we'll be talking about a different topic in the Dragon Age universe. From character deep dives to exalted marches and elven gods, we will cover it all.
There will be spoilers. And always remember, swooping is bad.
Hello and welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we talk about Dragon Age and its lore. I'm one of your hosts, Austin, also known as Teacup.
And I'm your other host, Shelby or Shecup.
And we are here with our lovely patrons for our lovely patron chat. And so I'm going to let our patrons introduce themselves. And we will start with C.W. Rogers.
Hi, I am Charles. You probably know me as CW Rogers 6 in the Discord, and luckily I was muted because I almost started doing a different podcast intro because my brain is fried today.
I do that all the time. Now that I don't do Holocron, it's a little less. But yeah, thanks for being here. And then we'll start with LVCC13.
Hello, everyone. I am Lizzie, or LVCC13.
And then Capricorn Tower.
That's me, Nick, or Capricorn Tower.
And then last but not least, the Crimson Knight.
Hello, I'm Steven, or the Crimson Knight.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here. We have an exciting patron chat. I hear that we are going to be talking about the Veilguard yet again in a companion debrief. Now, I know what those two words mean, Shelby. I know what those two words mean separately. But what are they together?
Yeah, so we're basically just talking about the portrayal of companions in the Veilguard. And I've asked our patrons to kind of pick one that they want to focus on, because I think it'll just be better for us to talk about one specifically. And then at the end, if we have time, we can do more than one and kind of talk about them as a group too, if we have time. But yeah, so each person's gonna pick one, and it's okay if we want to like if Charles and Lizzie, like you guys pick the same person, that's okay. It's okay if we're all different. That's totally fine with me. But yeah, so basically whatever you want to talk about can be positive, it can be negative. Just your general thoughts on the companions of Veilguard. So that is the plan for the evening.
All right. Who wants to go first?
I guess I'll go first then. I would say just overall, I love the companions in Veilguard. And my critique of all of them in general is the same critique I have for every single video game I've ever played. I want more. But overall, I think they're all pretty well written and well-rounded characters. And I really enjoyed taking all of them out with me. I would have to say, though, I have a tie between two for who are my favorites, Emmerich and Lucanus, but I think I'm going to focus on Lucanus today. I love that this man, regardless of whether or not you romance him, he remembers your drink choice. when you go to that coffee shop, like he mocks you a little bit if you say you don't like coffee, which I also love. That is such peak coffee snob behavior, and that I feel like that's very accurate to who he is. But I also love that he remembers. Like if you say, "Oh, my rook is a rook who only drinks tea," he's like, "Okay," but he makes sure that he has your favorite tea in the kitchen and stuff like that. And I just think he's a really interesting character. I would love to see him interact with Zevran at some point. I know it will never happen, but I would love it.
I've thought about that a lot, and I can't decide if they would like hate each other and fight or if they would be friends. I lean more toward they would hate each other.
I think that depends on whether or not Katarina was first Talon when Zevran was going through it.
Yeah. I feel like they would be more frenemies than anything else. Maybe getting into fights, but definitely sassing at each other the entire time.
I would be very curious to see if Zevran would even let Lucanus. Spoilers for the Veilguard, by the way. I'm about to spoil the
Here's
end
your
of
spoiler
Lucanus'.
alert.
Here's your spoiler warning. I'm going to spoil the end of Lucanus' arc in the Veilguard. If Zevran would even let Lucanus have a shot at being first Talon, whether he would go after Lucanus preemptively, it depends on where I guess you think Zevran is with regards to the crows. Like, was his goal, provided he survives the results of the end of Origins, whether or not his goal was to just take out the leadership of the crows as they existed in his time, or the entire institution of the crows? I guess that's the question, because if it's the institution of the crows, I have to wonder if he would even give Lucanus a shot as somebody who's in charge of the crows, or whether he would just decide to stab, which seems like Zevran's MO.
I think that it all depends on really if Zevran is able to recognize that perhaps the crows are a different organization than when he started his crusade. And I think Eight Little Talons kind of shows that the by the end of Eight Little Talons, the old guard, quote unquote, of the crows is gone. I mean, you have Taya, Viago, and Katarina, and that's who's left of the Eight Talons. And so maybe he could recognize that they're a different thing, and maybe he could trust Lucanus in some sort of way. I think it just depends on how entrenched he views Lucanus in being.
I also, to be fair, think, what you choose to do with Ilario would impact.
But that's a good point, though, Shelby, that it really would depend with that. I also think it also depends on where Zevran's at with the whole, oh my gosh, the world is ending again thing. I love how we kind of just forget that every time we talk about this stuff. Actual apocalypse is happening.
Yeah, and I mean, I think your choices in Origins matter too. Like how he ends that game depends on, I think, how he would view the crows going forward. But I don't see him personally. I don't see him fully abandoning the quest to eradicate the crows. So I don't know. It's a tricky situation, that's for sure.
And it's also possible that maybe his vendetta was specifically against House Aranai, or whatever his specific House of the Crows was. Maybe they just did things in a particularly scummy way that some of the other houses didn't engage in that kind of stuff. I mean, I kind of would expect that the torture would be kind of normal across as part of just assassin training, because they're trying to like make sure you don't break and that you don't reveal your employers and blah 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 and all of that stuff. But maybe specifically House Aranite was like the only one that was engaged in basically slave trading. So hard to say. Sort of picking up on the Lucanus. Yeah, I guess by sort of I want more thing is that we get introduced to him as Abomination, and Spite is silly and sometimes threatening, sometimes, but I just kind of want more information about it's not really something that's worked into his overall plot necessarily. We don't really get any resolution about his relationship with Spite, and if he's on the journey to separate from Spite, stuff like that. There's just more information, more things to explore with his character with regards to the abomination thing.
I really feel like it's not that the Veilguard treats possession as not a big deal because like everyone freaks out and we have the Mortalitasi and like there's a little bit, but I do feel like the games have gotten really far away of like Origins is very much of like if you're an abomination, you have to die. And then by the Veilguard, it's like, eh.
I think that's really indicative, though, of the area that you're in. It totally makes sense to me that a place like Ferelden is way more conservative in comparison on its attitude about magic than being in the literal Tevinter Imperium. So, and at least Northern Thedas in general, I feel like they have much more relaxed views about magic. Otherwise, Navarra wouldn't be able to do what Navarra does, and obviously the Tevinter of it all. So,
Wynn also like literally has to collapse before she's comfortable admitting to you, no matter how close you are with Wynn, she has to collapse on the battlefield before she gives you this very important tactical piece of information, which is she's an abomination. Dead. That she's dead. That she's
a zombie.
Is she a zombie? Questions for a later episode.
That's another chat.
Yeah,
I think we've had that debate in the Discord before.
I think we have. I mean, we have werewolves, right? I don't think we really have vampires in Dragon Age.
They exist. I can tell you they exist.
I know that, but we don't have
it's
them portrayed. Yes. I mean, what's her name? Zara Renata. Like, blood stuff. It comes close.
I have so many opinions about Zara Renata and the historical figure she's attempting to evoke that we cannot get into.
Yeah, no, that's off topic, but I feel you.
I feel like that was the most satisfying companion quest, though, or part of Lucanus's companion quest was taking her out. And also, when that scene started, I was just like, ew, okay, there's the Tevinter I was expecting.
I do feel like one thing that they do really well in the Veilguard is, and that they have been criticized for, to be fair, in the past, is that they do a really good job of tying in the stories from previously, like before the Veilguard was released, like Tevinter Nights, the short stories. I think they do a really good job of tying in those stories and, when those characters are portrayed in those stories to what's happening in Veilguard. Like Zara Renata is in Tevinter Nights. And there's a lot more examples too. And so I just feel like that's a nice touch that they did that because, there are some, particularly the Dragon Age 2 companion short stories, that while they don't necessarily have lore inconsistencies, it just kind of raised more questions than the game answered. So I really appreciated that about the companions, just in general.
By the way, I did recently discover, as part of my personal canon run, that one of those short stories got a fan animation where Gideon Emery reprised his role as Fenris.
Yeah.
If the audience was curious, I recently discovered that. You can find it through the short story on the wiki. I forget what the short story is, but I think it's just called Fenris.
Yeah, they're all just their names. I'll put the link to that video in the episode description.
It's very cool.
It is good.
I'll go next before I accidentally derail the entire thing with random Dragon Age stuff. I'm in the middle of my second playthrough right now, just because I am very painfully busy and have only had time to complete the first playthrough, and then I'm about 2/3 of the way through the second one. And I've really been quite enjoying my second playthrough more than my first one. And part of that is because with the companions, not every major moment for them is very clearly spelled out. They don't turn to Rook every time they're having a big emotional turning point and like spell it out completely for Rook exactly what you're supposed to be feeling at that particular moment. So I've been enjoying like noticing the details in some of them that faded to the background. And for me, the one that I have enjoyed the most up to this point has been Lace Harding. Because in the first playthrough of the game, for me, Lace Harding was kind of a nothing burger compared to the other companions. Like, she's there. She's fine. She didn't do anything that's particularly like eye rolling. She's just kind of there compared to characters like Imric or Tosh or Davrin, who are these big, larger than life characters. And Harding is just over here talking about cheese and camping. And I'm kind of like, what's going on here? Replaying through the game, I've been struck how that's kind of the point of the character, or at least one of the points of the character. There's a scene with Imric where she's trying to convince Imric like not to bring stacks of books to a camping trip. And I found that very interesting because it really sort of highlighted to me like Harding wants to maintain this connection to the world around her. She has a very deep connection to the world around her, but not in the way that we would think of in a traditional fantasy sense. If we talk about somebody who has that connection to nature, that's usually like a druid or an elf or somebody who lives in the forest. Harding, I think, is much more, she approaches it much differently, which I found an interesting contrast to some of the other characters. I also kind of got what they were going for with her main companion quest, which I do think is the weakest of the companion quests, in my opinion. I don't think they spell out very clearly the choice between like retaining Harding's own humanity and what makes her so special and shouldering the rage of 1,000 generations for what Solus did. But I am definitely noticing it more in my second playthrough that that's kind of what they were going for her. I still don't really understand the choice, but that's also because I haven't picked the embrace your anger option. So maybe they make it make sense. But thus far, she is the one that I have come to appreciate more on my second playthrough. Probably my least favorite of the companions still. It might be a toss-up between her and Balara, but I still think they're both excellent characters, and I'm definitely appreciating Harding more on my second playthrough the game.
I just feel like with Harding's portrayal, it's always hard when you bring back a character that's been in a previous game, right? So I just personally felt like her character in the Veilguard was portrayed so differently than her portrayal in Inquisition. And I do think, to be fair, part of that can be explained lore wise by, okay, like the Inquisitor was her boss and there's like a more formal relationship there. But to me, I don't necessarily think that tracks fully because, like, kind of Rook is also still your boss, just not as like formal of an organization. Um, but I don't know. I just felt like there were a lot of times in the early game where like they were trying to make her be the comedic relief, and I didn't feel like it worked out personally. I just felt like she seemed more immature in the Veilguard than she did in Inquisition. I don't know if others agreed, but it just annoyed me a lot, to be fair.
I think part of that, though, is that the fact that, spoiler alert again, Varric's dead. So she's mourning Varric. This hugely traumatic thing just happened. And so she's trying to kind of fill the comedic void that Varric left, and she's bad at it. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's why it just doesn't come off right, because she's not that kind of person, but she feels like, okay, Varric's gone. Brooks stepped into this part of his role. Like maybe she's subconsciously thinking, I have to fill this part of it, or we're never going to get through this.
She has a note of darkness if you choose to take her with you in the opening scenes. She has this note of darkness to her that isn't really present if you don't take her with you. And to my recollection, it's been a couple of months. To my recollection, Nev doesn't respond as intensely as Harding does to getting the crap kicked out of her in the prologue section if you take her with you.
I think you're right.
I definitely found Harding more compelling. The run I'm doing right now, big spoilers for the Veilguard. No, seriously, I'm going to spoil one of the biggest choices in the game. Turn back now. The run I'm doing now has her being the party that gets injured in the prologue, and then she's going to die on Teardrop Island. And that is adding more dimension to her character for me, knowing that that's the direction that she's going, that ultimately she is going to do whatever it takes and sacrifice herself. I've also kind of noticed with Davrin that's being telegraphed much heavier than I thought it was. That whole, like, why either of those characters could be the one that decides to jump Gillinane and gets themselves killed.
Yeah. I think with Harding, like, I think there's a lot of potential that is missed with Harding's, like, finishing her story, because I think the majority of players, myself included, are not going to sacrifice my sky puppy to Gillinane. And so, but Harding, like, in the videos I've watched, because I haven't actually kept her alive yet, but the way she will react to Solus, like the first time she sees Solus since everything has come out, like, that's one of the best companion banters I've heard, where she's just like, oh, what are you sorry for? Is it killing my best friend or fucking over my entire race of people? And so I do appreciate that with Harding. I did with Shelby. I found myself frustrated with her. And just in general, I found, like, I do appreciate that you can kind of, like, ask about the Inquisition in her dialogue and have that thing of, like, oh, tell me about all the Inquisition or whatever. And that was fun. But I tended to forget about her once I got Lucanus because his abilities were better.
I'm actually glad that she's kind of our only link to the Inquisition. I do sort of like that, because she is representative of whatever is left of the Inquisition in the Veilguard, since each member of the Veilguard represents a party. But I know this might be a hot take. I don't think I would have liked the next DA game being a direct sequel to Inquisition. I think they work better when they're not directly continuing the plot from the previous game. And based on what I saw in the art book, I don't think it would have been as good as people think it would have been to have a direct continuation of the story. And I've spoken to a lot of people for whom Veilguard is their first Dragon Age. They have never played another Dragon Age before, and they loaded it up. And I thought that through Harding, making it a personal connection to Harding, I thought was such a great way to kind of bring across what the Inquisition was. That it was this family environment. It was this very serious environment. They were there, they had a mission, but they loved each other very dearly, except when they didn't. Certain companions' relationships with each other. But I did like that angle, and I liked it being through Harding, that you can ask about that. It kind of spares it being the info dump I worried it would be. Like, the plot as it was going to be in the art book, there were certain things I looked at, I was like, I don't know how you're going to explain this to a new player. I don't know how you're going to communicate this. But we got what we got, so we have to work with what we have.
Yes, the art book has a lot of really great ideas and a lot of ideas that are not so great. Honorable mention too, as has been mentioned on past patron chats, the quote, fuck ass submarine.
By me. That was me. If this is your first patron chat, I don't like the submarine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think with that, let's go to our mid break and then we can come back and keep talking about some more companions.
I went to Kirkwall once. Yeah? Bit of a shithole. Yeah.
Well, tell me, have you ever licked a lamppost in winter?
What do you think rooks like in person? Do you think they smell nice?
What is wrong with you? And have you forgotten which side you're on?
No. I mean, think about if we could turn them. Riding beside a rook at the head of Devinter's vast armies. I could stab them for you, on the house.
All right, welcome to the middle of the show where we take time to thank our patrons, like our patrons here on the chat with us. Thank you to all of our patrons. Special thank yous to our first patrons, Genesis and Lisa M. Thank you so much for your support. If you'd like to join us on Patreon, you can do so at patreon.com/DALorecast. Also, another great way to support us is to leave us ratings or reviews on Apple or Spotify. If you leave us 5 stars and some kind words, we will read it out on a future episode of the show. We do not have a review or comment to read today, so if you have not yet to do that, now is the time to do that via Apple or Spotify. And then, last but not least, come hang out with us on Discord, the Cubs Podcasting, and more Discord server. You can come hang out with us there. Find that link in the episode description. And with that, that's all I have for the middle of the show.
Don't Templars have anything better to do than come up with new ways to torment mages?
No. Again, I'm so sorry Manfred keeps wandering in while you're asleep, Lucanus.
I think he wonders about spite.
Curiosity has feet.
We have enough feet already.
It has feet.
You fear barbarians will swoop down upon you.
Yes, swooping is bad.
All right, let's get back into it. Who wants to go next? Kick us off.
Yeah, I guess I'll go. But I think most interesting companion to me is Emmerich. He's working. You meet him working in the. It's been so long since I played the game that I can't remember.
The Necropolis.
The Necropolis. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
But you meet him working in the Necropolis and working with the dead. You come to find out that he's absolutely terrified of dying, which is kind of feels like oxymoronic. But over his personal quest, you get to know him, get to know why he fears dying, and get to find out that he's trying to become a lich so he can avoid death. And then, like near the end of his personal quest, his personal butler and probably who he would consider his best friend, Manfred, ends up sacrificing himself for Emmerich. And then, like, you can, with a push from you, he can end up giving up his dream of becoming a lich to save Manfred's life. And then when you talk to him afterwards, he's perfectly satisfied with it. And I think just the journey that you go on with him is honestly, in my opinion, the best story arc for any of the companions. And for me, it's just a satisfying ending.
I have to agree. I think that he is really the standout companion for me, just because he's so well written, but also because his story has a satisfying conclusion. I feel like there's several companions whose stories, while they're not badly written necessarily, you're either left wanting more or you're confused by how it ended. And I don't feel that that's true with Emmerich. And also, he's just so charming and easy to like, I think. So for me, he really is the standout among the bunch. And I also think, Emmerich's choice with what you do, whether you make him a lich or not, it's like the one of the most debated choices of the game. So, you don't have that if he's badly written, right? So,
This actually low key goes back to Lucanus too, but oh my gosh, the waistcoat game for these characters. They both look so good in a waistcoat. I'm just like, ah, it's so good.
I want to climb that man like a tree. Sorry, who said that? Who said that? Definitely not the Emmerich romancer. Day one Emmerich romancer. One of the things too, I just want to go off this idea of like the choice at the end of Emmerich's arc. The best Dragon Age choices, and for me, a lot of the Dragon Age choices, there's very few that I feel this doesn't apply to. But the best Dragon Age choices are the ones where you can make an extremely strong case for either choice. You can make a case for one choice over the other. Back when I used to do Dragon Age TikToks, and I don't anymore, mostly because of a time thing. But I was once challenged. Somebody said to me, like, I cannot understand why anyone would encourage Cullen to keep taking lyrium in Dragon Age Inquisition. So I had a whole video on, actually, you can make a pretty good case to tell him to continue to do lyrium, especially if you're role-playing and you haven't read the script to the end of the game and you don't know what happens. There is a pretty good argument for him to continue doing it. And I think with Emmerich, the amount of debate that I've had in my real life over the Emmerich choice, because people that I believed were very close to me and understood the way that I approach things and thought like I do made a different and wrong choice was a lot. And I think that speaks to the quality of the writing of Emmerich's choice.
Also, I kind of forgot to mention the part where Emmerich annoys the hell out of Tosh talking about his personal interests is absolutely relatable.
yeah, for sure.
It's so great. I love how he's just info dumping all the time. They're both doing it too, and they don't realize it. And it's so funny. It reminds me of work sometimes, though, when I go in and they're arguing, and I'm like, okay, I get to break up an argument like I do at my job because I deal with children every day.
My favorite part of that, though, is that you can resolve it, which is something I feel like we don't get in a lot of the other Dragon Age games. Veilguard might be the first game where two characters have a conflict or a personality disagreement that's treated less as a haha funny joke in the background and more like we actually need to sit down and have a conversation. And unlike Lucanus and Davern, who just sort of call a truce but still fucking hate each other, Tosh and Emmerich, whatever you choose, they do figure out how to talk to each other like adults, which is very rare for this series.
Yeah, I think they figure out how to talk to each other like adults comparatively for the series. I'm not sure I would say objectively they get that down pat, like for our world, but definitely for Dragon Age, it is miles above the rest of them. Like, I mean, Anders and Fenris can barely stand to be in the same party with each other. So
7 years and they still hate each other.
Yeah,
The DA2 companions could never come to an understanding like Tosh and Emmerich do.
To be fair, though, that's the Kirkwall of it all, also, because Kirkwall's just a bit of a shithole, as Dorian once eloquently said.
I think that there is less of like, with the DA2 companions, there is no compromise, especially in the Fenris Anders dynamic. And with Tosh and Emmerich, there is compromise to be had. Also, the DA2 companions are not having to work together to prevent the end of the world. I think DA2 is the only one that doesn't have a world-ending crisis.
yeah, it's more self-contained.
Yes.
Nick?
I guess I will go next. Yeah, I mean, I'll play into my stereotype and we'll talk about Tosh. There's some things that I think really worked for me, and I think there are things that didn't work for me because the writers just couldn't make up their minds about what they wanted to do with the Kunari as per usual, which is unfortunate. The things that I thought worked really well with Tosh were the sort of immigrant narrative between and dynamic between her and her mother. I thought that was a very, you know, tense but realistic dynamic that mimics real life things, that I've seen some friends go through with their parents, where you're like, well, I don't know if I'm actually even this thing that you say that I am, that you brought over from another culture, because I'm not in that culture anymore. I'm Ravani or whatever. And I thought the sort of encouraging her to either like see things from her mom's perspective a little bit more, or just go full Ravani with everything. I thought that was interesting. But yeah, but then there's also the things where like really there shouldn't be that much of a weirdness between with Tosh being non-binary and Shathan, because like the Qun makes, or at least my understanding of the Qun makes space for non-binary people, because the whole thing is that the Qun doesn't waste anything. So they would have a place for a person regardless of their gender presentation or gender identity. And it's more about, I don't know, I guess when we got through all of the conversations with Iron Bull and stuff from Inquisition, I was like, okay, so it's not that they have strict gender roles, it's that your role determines your gender, in sort of like an inversion of these things, where if you're a warrior, that means you're a man, not that if you're a man, you were raised to be a warrior. And I thought that was an interesting thing that they kind of just dropped and didn't go back to in the Veilguard, which I found frustrating. So you get sort of this, so then it kind of cheapens the conflict between Tosh and their mom. I think I might have been using she, her pronouns previously. My mistake. They, them pronouns. And yeah, so it kind of cheapens their conflict because it just makes it feel a little bit lazy. But even though that is true, I still thought the ending of Tosh's companion quest, or the one where Shathan dies, it was still really emotionally resonant for her, for their dynamic to end that way. And I felt it. I felt the feelings. And so I think that says something about the writing, even though the sort of world building might have been kind of thrown to the wayside a little bit. I think the emotional storytelling with Tosh and their mom was still very well done.
I do agree with that. And like you said, I really appreciate that Tosh, their major choice is less regarding their gender identity and more regarding their like cultural identity, whether they are Ravani or want to embrace the Qun. I wasn't frustrated with Tosh, but sometimes I found myself, like you said, like there are terms within the lore that they could have used, but they chose to use our 21st century this world terms, which I am all for representation and understanding that, but like Liliana never identifies as bisexual. There's not, Dorian is very obviously gay and he says I'm only attracted to men, but he never says that, I'm gay. Like these identity terms had not been established. I'm okay with them being in there, but I found myself like the scene where where they come out to their mom, I found a little immersive breaking for me, just in general. And I don't think it's bad. I don't think that it's unwarranted in Dragon Age, but I found like I did find the conversation interesting where their mom is like, "Oh, you're this," and Tasha's like, "No, I don't." Because if I understand what their mom is saying is that there's a term in the Qun for someone who does not identify with their birth gender. And Tasha's basically like, "No, I don't identify with either gender."
That
And
was
so,
how I read it.
yeah, that's
That
which
was
I
the
kind of
problem.
which I kind of like. I get like, okay, you don't want, and I can see that in the Qun of like, okay, your gender, as we said, is defined by your role, and if you need to be beyond that, we have a term for that, and so I get that in there. I just found that a little immersive breaking, but all in all, like Tosh, I think is a good addition, and I did enjoy a lot of their story, especially the connection of the Kunari, the Kossith to the dragons again.
I do agree with sort of like the bringing of contemporary real world terminology into the setting that hasn't really used those words before. Like but I also don't know how they should have handled it because clearly in the year of our Lord 2025, people do need to be hit over the head with some things. And playing coy with the language can create a lot of stupid shit down the line. So yeah, I don't know how they could have done that in a way that didn't feel as like, oh, so we're just gonna throw non-binary around all over the place. Which again, like that's fine, but it didn't feel like it fit the setting. But I also, I want to make space for, non-binary people who feel like we need this to be a normalized term and stuff like that. So it shouldn't sound weird, whatever the context. So, it's kind of a complicated story beat.
Did anybody here read Jason Schreier's latest Bloomberg article that was the autopsy on Veilguard?
I'm going to put a pin in this because that's going to be next week's episode that we release. So I don't want us to get tangenting on that.
Can I bring up one tiny thing from that? I promise it will be relevant to the Tosh thing.
Okay.
So we will not talk about that article.
Yeah.
We will talk about one tiny thing in that article because it relates to this. I was very disappointed by how little the Qunari were represented in the game. And we know from that article that EA discouraged BioWare from having too controversial of factions. They wanted the factions to be likable. They wanted to steer away from the previous controversy of those factions. And the Qunari historically have been kind of a mess. They've been a mess from the beginning. They were really a mess in DA2. There was some huge controversy, a lot of retcons, and a lot of recontextualization that had to happen in Inquisition. A lot of the Iron Bull's dialogue kind of exists to try to add nuance where the writers did not put nuance in originally for the Qunari because they didn't think it through. And I do feel like for me that I don't know whether there was some executive meddling with regards to can the Qunari actually show up, because the best parts of Tasha's storyline are their intersection with the Qun. And having more Qunari out in the world, we see individual one-offs like Rowan, who's with the Lords of Fortune, or there's a Qunari that randomly that you can find in Treviso if you don't get it blighted. But I wonder if the fact that all the Qunari who are not like Tosh basically get reduced down to the Antom, and not even like the real Antom, like this murderous mercenary version of the Antom. Like they've essentially all gone Tal Vashoth. I think that did really hurt Tasha's storyline to not have that point of comparison. Because I think we could have gotten a lot more explanation as to why Tosh doesn't really fit into the gender binary that the Qun has thus far established as being. I wonder how much of that was impacted by that.
I think generally there was a lot of meddling, and I think there was probably a lot more meddling in Tasha's story, particularly that than any of the other companions, number one, but also number two, that probably went further than just about the Kunari. So I definitely hear that.
Yeah.
I really quickly, I know we're running out of time, but I want to talk about Davrin because I was so excited for Davrin, and I do love him a lot. He is one of my favorite characters. His romance, while I haven't finished my second playthrough, I think his romance will be. I will like it more than I liked the Lucanus romance. But I was also disappointed by Davrin's story because it's mostly it's not Davrin's story, it's Asan's story. And I think that is very disappointing for, the Grey Warden character, for, the first Black Elf companion that we've gotten. It just felt like a letdown, especially when the Grey Wardens, like, what are they going to do now in this world other than, okay, well, let's eradicate the last of the Darkspawn, right? So I just felt like there could have been so much more with Davrin's story, and like he does have some wrestling of purpose that goes on in his companion quests, but I felt like it just could have been deeper. So I love him, but I wanted a little bit more.
I agree just real quickly on that with especially from a point of it would have been cool to see Davrin in a place not exactly but similar to where Cassandra is at the end of Inquisition with the Seekers of like figuring out like, okay, what are we gonna be? Who are we outside of the Blights? Who, like, what is our, do we have a purpose? Do we need to disband? Do we need to keep going? Is there a purpose to find? And I think that's really put in Antoine and Evka's story. And I think that they really wanted to bring back the Griffins from the end of Last Flight. And so I think, again, with this time constraint, they combined that. I think originally there might have been more of a split of like maybe the Griffins. I would have preferred the Griffin story to been with Antoine and Evka verse and then Davrin in this like existential, what are the Wardens going to do? Because as important as the Griffins are, the Grey Wardens are almost essential to what we understand Thetis, modern day Thetis. Like, is there Thetis without the Grey Wardens?
Great question. But I also think, I mean, we know that Davrin was one of the earliest companions that they developed because not only was he in those leaks that came out several years ago, he was in I want to say one of the very early trailers, maybe back when he had an American accent. So
2020, I think.
Yes, thank you. We know that he was one of probably the earlier ones developed. So I this is another situation where I feel like maybe not meddling in his story, but it probably changed and the original concept got spliced in with something else. Maybe Griffins, I don't know, who knows. But it definitely isn't, in my opinion, as cohesive a story as like Emmerich's. So which is sad.
I think Davrin was kind of one of those characters that really suffered from the too much time in development. There's some, I think Tosh is one who suffered from not enough time, and Davrin's definitely one who suffered from too much. And that's really the core of the not so great things about the Veilguard. There are two main issues or problems in development for it for me: too much and too little time, and EA being a, pardon my French, fucking meddlesome shit.
Cosign completely. Yeah.
And that kind of
fuck you, Andrew Wilson.
Yes. This kind of leads into because we are running out of time, but I just want to quickly give my little 2 cents, which mine will be Nev Gallus. I love Nev Gallus. I think she's quirky or quick-witted and funny, and I like her dialogue. I found myself extremely disappointed, not in Nev's story or any of her writing or anything like that, but the fact that Tevinter slavery was missing from this game. And I think that again, this EA kind of meddlesome of not wanting any kind of problematic stuff in there. And I don't know if BioWare could have done this well, but we had spent 3 games hearing about Tevinter and their slave empire. Like we had built this up, and then we get there and we get this faction that is entirely devoted to freeing slaves from the Magisterium, and nothing. None of the story, barely any of the stories in Menrathis deal with that. Nev's personal story doesn't deal with that, and so I found myself just disappointed in that. Like, who, what are we doing with this? Like, we should be tearing down Menrathis because they're built on the backs of slaves, and it's missing from the Veilguard.
Yeah, there was certainly an attempt to, add nuance to the class dynamics within Tevinter society through Nev's storytelling, right? Like, and how she becomes sort of a champion of the people and that sort of thing, and the non-Altus class people and all of that. But yeah, like, this is all really divorced from the context that there's an entire other class of people underneath the Soparati that are just completely glazed over, and it's really unfortunate, and upsetting. Upsetting.
Yeah, and I remember saying on an episode leading up to the Veilguard of like, I would rather them not talk about slavery at all than do it poorly. And I still stand by that. I stand by that. I think doing it poorly could have done a lot of damage to the game. But
For sure. I would have been super, super annoyed if, like, Nev's quest was, oh, we beat the one Venatori person. Now all the slaves are released. I would have been so pissed if they did that. So I'm glad that they didn't. But it was still very sterile.
But no, and it comes down to the similar thing of like, you can walk freely through Menrathis as a Kunari. You can walk like, and everyone is super kind to you if you're an elf. Like, what the heck? Where is my racist status?
Not that we want that, but it is lore breaking. But I do think we're out of time, so we should wrap it up.
All right. Thank you all for being here and sharing all of your thoughts. We will probably talk more and more about the Veilguard as we all finish multiple playthroughs and digest this game and continue to think and sit lying awake at night and be like, oh, I should have said this. But I'm going to let you all go around and plug anything you got going on, let people know where they can find you, and we'll start with CW Rogers.
So you can find me on all the social media worth having and a few that are not at CW Rogers 6. That's CWROGERS and the number 6. If I try to do all my pluggables, we'll be here for another 5 minutes because I'm super busy. But I do want to give a particular shout out to Legacy Expo, which is a Star Wars EU fan event that is happening in September 13th through 14th in Burbank, California. That is the one that I've picked to highlight this week that I am involved with.
Awesome. LVCC
if you still want to hang out with Star Wars fans, I will say, I will understand if you don't.
Yeah. All right. LVCC 13.
I am LVCC13 or Lizzie, and you can find me in the Avengers audio drama on all of the podcatchers where I play Janet Van Dyne / the Wasp. And maybe eventually you'll see me on Twitch and YouTube again. I've been super busy. I'm doing some stuff that means I do not have time to stream. But hopefully when my life has maybe potentially calmed down a little bit, I can start that again. But we'll see. In the meantime, look for my voice in the Avengers audio drama.
Capricorn Tower.
That's me, Nick, or Capricorn Tower. I mostly just haunt the Discord.
And then last but not least, the Crimson Knight.
I'm Stephen or Crimson Knight, and I'm on Discord.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here. Always a pleasure to have these great chats. And thank you all for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. You can find us on Twitter at DA Lorecast.
If you have any lore questions, topics to unpack, or side character suggestions, join our Cups Podcasting and More Discord server. It's easily the best place on the internet. You can also support us financially through our Patreon. You can find us there on patreon.com/DragonAgeLorecast.
The Dragon Age Lorecast is part of the Robots Radio Network. For more information about the Robots Radio Network, join the Discord server via the link in our episode description.
If you enjoyed the show or learned something new today, please subscribe, leave us a review, and join the Patreon. And if you enjoyed our intro and outro music, give a big thank you to Pipeman Studios. Thank you, Pipeman. Thanks again for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. We'll see you next time.
Have you ever wanted to deep dive into the lore and stories behind all your favorite Marvel movies? Then do we have the show for you? I'm Captain Shenko.
And I'm Psych88. Join us as we dissect the media megalith that is the MCU. We'll talk about the origin stories, the fights, and everything in between.
The MCU Lorecast releases on all major podcasting platforms on Mondays as part of the Robots Radio Rocket Club and can be found on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.